Los Angeles. The most populous city in the state of California, grew rapidly from an 18th century Spanish pueblo with a few hundred inhabitants to a booming metropolis by the end of the 19th century. The gold rush, 1848 to 1855, brought many prospectors to California, but by the 1890s, over 100,000 people had settled in the city itself with the coming of the Southern Pacific and Santa Fe railroads. The city of the late 1890s was centered at the southern end by the Plaza area. Most 19th century structures no longer exist, having been demolished to make way for the Civic Center, state and federal buildings. Surviving buildings can be found in the Plaza area or south of 2nd Street. Alameda Street, on the east side of the Old Plaza on the west side of Chinatown, was, in the 19th century, along with Commercial Street, Los Angeles' red light district. Located next to the Southern Pacific Railroad, it became notorious for prostitution after it had been banned from the central business district. In fact, the first view of Los Angeles for passengers arriving in the city were the brothels, known as houses of ill fame, on North Alameda Street. The notoriety of this street reached a peak in the 1890s before restrictions were enforced, but up until then, police and elected officials were said to be regular visitors. So bad had prostitution become that the city council and police commissioners met to discuss what should be done. They fell on the ill-conceived plan of removing women to Sonora Town nearby. However, this downtown neighborhood, in what is now the city's Chinatown, had enough of its own social problems already, including houses of ill fame where saloons doubled as brothels. It had descended into a slum from the mid-1800s, following the gold rush and a rapid growth in population as settlers arrived seeking their fortune. Sonora Town was known for its tumble-down adobe houses, traditional Spanish mud brick homes, with rooms occupied by families of several people. Today, we take a look at what life was like in the crowded slums of Los Angeles from the late 1800s to the turn of the 20th century, and in an account by a woman writing on what she revealed on a tour of the slums in 1895, you will discover the scenes she witnessed when she visited one of these notorious houses of ill fame. Before we move on, if you're interested in history like this, and you want to find out more about what life was really like for people in the past, please consider subscribing for more content. If you'd like to support what we make for you, check out the description for links to ways you can help us continue bringing the past alive. For much of the 19th century, it could be said that Los Angeles didn't have a slum district. There were a few lodging houses here and there that were overcrowded, poorly ventilated and liable to spread tuberculosis, as well as individual dwellings that exhibited the extreme poverty of their inhabitants, but nothing to the extent that, say, New York experienced. But population growth raises land values and landlords look to profit from crowding people into as small an area as possible. In a plea for better building regulations from the Municipal League to the mayor in 1906, the League stated that for several years a great number of laborers from Mexico, Southern Europe, Russia, as well as Americans from the East Coast, were housed within half a mile of the plaza, crowded together in one-story shacks constructed of rotten board, rusty tins and scraps of dirty cloth. Little protection was required against the elements due to the mild California weather, but people crowded into such shelters resulted in all the conditions necessary for disease and vermin to flourish. Unlike the lofty tenements of eastern cities, the poor districts of Los Angeles took the form of low-rise, but equally crowded housing courts, suffering from poor lighting and terrible sanitation. Here, a family consisting of a father and 5 or 6 grown married sons and daughters might live together in one room. 20 such families to a court might share just one common water faucet in the yard to supply water for all. That Los Angeles had a slum district was perhaps not known outside a city that promoted itself as one of wealth and refinement. but local reporters made an effort to expose the squalid living conditions in housing courts erected by greedy property owners. One such article stated, "Disease lurks at the threshold of these miserable hovels called homes. 15 people are crowded into some of these shacks, where children manage to drag through their sad little lives, despite their uncared-for condition and the stifling and fetid air they are compelled to breathe. The wickedness and sin are vicious. There is little restraining or uplifting influence there, and the whole thing is packed so closely together that it is impossible for girl or boy, young man or maiden, or for even the little tots hardly able to navigate themselves, to escape seeing, hearing, almost breathing the horrors that blight their lives, warp their understanding, stunt their physical development, and make of them the kind of material with which penitentiaries, reform schools, and jails are fed." In the following eyewitness account by a newspaper reporter writing in 1895, you will find out what it was like to visit a house of ill repute in the slums, and why, for her, it was a place of wickedness and sin. When this assignment was given to me, I undertook it with the temerity born of ignorance. I continue it with the courage born of conviction. Truly one half the world knows not how the other half lives, or, knowing, cares not enough to inquire into the cause and seek for some remedy that can be of real, definite, and lasting avail. And so, what was revealed in the slums of Los Angeles, a look over the other side of the fence into its seamy side. It has been said of Los Angeles that nowhere else are sin and vice so flagrantly open or displayed so brazenly. The fact that the assertion was so bitterly condemned and contested at the time it was made would seem to be good evidence that the blow hit home. Be that as it may, at the time the principal railroad ingress to the city passed between 2 rows of those habitations, known in police annals as cribs, and occupied by the most degraded and hardened denizens of the half-world, abandoned women. Abandoned, desolate at best, and when applied to women, meaning that they are so, not only by the rest of their sex, but by all the good and pure and noble instincts and traits with which each atom of humanity is endowed at birth. Abandoned, indeed, by everything except the scum of the earth among the male species. Naturally enough, when a woman reaches that stage of degradation, she knows not what she does, nor how. And so it came to pass that when the citizens of Los Angeles felt that for the sake of decency, whether or not in consequence of the open rebuke quoted does not matter, some step must be taken to mend, or at least ameliorate the Alameda Street nuisance. The front doors and windows of those cribs were boarded up on the west side of the street, and a high board fence was erected between those on the east side and the sidewalk. The evil was not removed, but the appearance of evil was in a way obscured, as it were. Most of the property in question belonged to 2 parties. There is a state law which covers both the owners of property put to such and those occupying it for such purpose, but it has not as yet been enforced. By it the scourge could legally be entirely wiped out, but officials, one and all, claim that by enforcing such a law worse evils would be entailed. Whether or not they are right is yet an open question in the minds of many who have thought of the matter at all. J. Harry Johnston, City Constable, and William A. Bosquell, ex-police detective, and at present Deputy City Constable, who have both been actively engaged for the past 8 or 10 years in the suppression of crime of all sorts in and about the city, assert without hesitation that as the same conditions prevail the world over, that the evil known as the social evil exists in every city and town in the world. It would be an almost superhuman task to root it out, and that it is safer and better for the community to isolate it in one section, and that where it can be kept under strict police surveillance, instead of scattering it broadcast over the community, where from each place that the bacilli take root a fresh eruption may be expected surrounding it. It was upon this principle they have been working for 2 or 3 months, and are still continuing to work. One of these property owners was arrested a couple of months ago, and was released on a technicality by the court. With such assistance and backing from the tribunals, it was felt that there was no hope for a permanent abolishment of this class, and the next best move was considered and taken, which was to restrict it as much as possible, confine it to as small a section as was practicable, and make it as unobtrusive as might be. The very fact of rendering it unobtrusive, however, attracted attention, and morbid curiosity in both sexes drew hundreds to the cancer spot where before there had been tens. That was only temporary, however, and Friday night at 8:30 there were less than 100 men and boys of all nationalities, and all of the commoner class, walking about the enclosure viewing the painted puppets as they sat behind their blinds, arrayed in theatrical-looking costumes, usually bright in colour, but except in a few cases decent in cut and fashioning. Some of them were, to be sure, smoking cigarettes, but for the most part they were reading or sewing. Each one was alone, and many of them were singing. Everything was orderly and quiet. The one policeman whose business it is to patrol the interior of that enclosure was there, and except for the horrifying realization of the soul-searing consciousness of what the place really is, it might have been mistaken for a scene in a theatre. The rooms were all brilliantly lighted, and all were furnished as parlours, with portieres, curtains, concealing the doors leading into inner apartments, for these habitations consist each of a suite of 2 rooms. The rental of these 2 rooms is $15 a week, or $60 a month, unfurnished. There are about 50 of these suites in the enclosure, and in one property across the street there are 7 or 8 more. The women are principally French and Belgian, with a few Portuguese and Spanish, and 1 or 2 only of Americans. Such was the condition of the enclosure last Friday night. Desperate at its best, but 1,000% better, so the officials say, than it was 6 months ago in that locality. Large electric lights are to be placed at either side of a saloon that is now building at the central point of the fence, where there will be 2 6-foot alleys into the enclosure, and they will be the only model of either ingress or egress. These 2 alleys will lead directly off Alameda Street. The whole place will be in a glare of light, and the police will be able to see just who enters and leaves. The work has been accomplished by the doughty constable and his deputy, almost unaided, has therefore certainly not added to the city's disgrace, and both feel confident that the restriction already established can be furthered if the right kind of help be given, but it is terribly uphill work at best. The same means that have accomplished restricting and confining the desperate sinfulness among the lowest and most degraded class have also been used with the same effect in the next higher grade of the same evil, and whereas otherwise respectable localities were infested before the recent raids with houses of ill repute, they are now all being slowly gathered into one locality. Truly it is a case of between 2 evils choose the lesser, when, with laws covering the points in question, they cannot be enforced, and the resultant evils must be endured in as decent a way as may be.